Joining me today is author Alretha Thomas, author of The Daughter Between Them. TV actress, award-winning playwright, and novelist Alretha Thomas brings us a psychological thriller about two mothers that is told in two timelines, 2009 and 2019. One is an elementary school nurse living in New York who battles mental health issues. The other is a news reporter living in California who aspires to be the first African American editor at the newspaper where she works. Both women are harboring life-changing secrets involving a missing child and an attack. As the story unfolds, it's revealed that these women have a past connection. The two stories converge in a very explosive finale. Thomas shares how her own traumatic childhood and losing her mother at age 14 has influenced the writing of this novel. The former model is a SAG-AFTRA actress who has appeared in numerous films, television series, and commercials. She's also appeared on two iconic soap operas, Days of Our Lives and General Hospital. Thomas is currently a series regular on Tyler Perry's Assisted Living, a television program on BET that's in its fifth year. Welcome to the show, Alretha. Nice to have you on.
Thank you, Kathryn. It's great to be here. And thank you for that beautiful introduction.
Well, it's all true. It's all about you. And yeah, obviously, it's going to be all about you in this next half hour. And my first question is, what is the connection between your book, your new novel, or your new memoir, or novel actually, and your history of abuse, as I described in the interview? I'm in the intro.
Yes, there is an interesting connection, and I was inspired by my childhood. I lost my mom when I was 14. I actually found her deceased in her home. So it was very traumatic, needless to say. My mom was my everything, just like any little girl. My mother was, I always say, stop traffic, gorgeous. She was beautiful, and it was a curse and a blessing, and a curse because she attracted the wrong type of people. And my mom grew up sheltered, so she had become estranged from her family, and she was kind of out there on her own and taken advantage of. I had a stepdad, and he was abusive. He was in and out of jail. I was a bedwetter, so I would get these extension cord beatings. And I remember I used to say, the day that I stopped wetting the bed, and the day that I stopped getting beating, life is going to be grand. That's how low the bar was for me. And then prior to that time, I was born in Oakland, raised in San Francisco. When we were living in Oakland, I was scalded by a neighbor. She had mental issues, and I was scalded. Had second degree burns. I had to learn to walk again. So there was a lot of things in the beginning, but the beatings, the scalding, and then I was molested. So I had a really rocky start. But
I'm going to stop
in,
you there because,
yeah,
as obviously as a social worker and as a counselor, as a therapist, you described your mother. She was beautiful. So maybe she had been overprotected in her own growing up period. Where was she in all of this in terms of protecting you, or was she aware of the beatings, the scalding, the molesting? How did she fit into that picture?
she did the best she could. She was very asthmatic, so my mother was sickly and did not have a lot of strength to do a lot of things, but she tried to protect the best way she could. I remember the day that I was scalded, and I remember her almost knocking down the door to the bedroom where I was sitting on the bed flipping through a picture book. I was only 3, but I still at that age remember the terror in her eyes. She wanted to kill that woman. I remember when I was a little girl, my mother would ask me, she said, actually asking me about my stepfather. Did he touch you down there? So had her eyes open and she was looking, but things were happening because of her illness that she was not able to protect. But I know the love was there, and I know if she could have done better, she would have.
So she was powerless, or she felt powerless, and I guess she was powerless. And even though she may have been aware, she couldn't do anything about
No,
it.
and when she found out about the gentleman that was molesting, she almost killed him, you know. But you have to realize this is a time, my mom was born in 1939. This was the 60s and 70s. We didn't have smartphones, we didn't have the internet. People weren't as sharp as they are today. You know, they weren't as aware as they are today of things. And then you have to couple that with having 6 children, being on her own, and being sickly. It was a lot. I know people struggle with one child, let alone 6, and being very young. I applaud my mother that she kept us together, that she survived as long as she did, because it was difficult. It was a hard road to go, you know. And I think about that, and I think about the love she had for me. My mother played jacks with us when she could. She cooked, she sewed our clothes, you know, she came to our school events when she could, and all of that, even struggling to navigate these bad relationships. You know, it was a lot. It was a lot. And I witnessed that. I witnessed my mom crying, and I would break down and cry, you know, and I just wish I had been older, that I could have done more for her. But I applaud her for what she did and all that she did, you know, in spite of all that was going on. And she didn't have her family around her because she was proud and she didn't want them to see her struggling,
Yeah.
you know.
How did she die?
Asthma. She had asthma. She had a very bad asthma attack, and that's how she died.
So you're 14 years old. You come into the room. Here's your mother, the one you feel protected by and loved, the only one, it sounds like, age 14. What did you do? How did you react? And then how did you go forward?
Well, when I came in the house and I saw my mom on the sofa, I don't know, I just had this intuitive feeling that she wasn't with us anymore. And I remember going to her because I had gone out to play. I'd seen her earlier and she was in the restroom and she was going through some things, but it was par for the course. I didn't know anything was different. And so apparently my stepfather had put her on the sofa. So when I came in and I saw her there, I walked to her and I touched her, and she was already cool to the touch. And I just thought about TV and how people try to listen for a pulse. And I just knew she was gone. And I wrote a note to my baby sister. It was my stepfather was her biological father. And I told her to take the note down to him that my mother had died. And the next thing I knew, I heard he was a big guy. I could hear him pounding up the stairs. And I must have blacked out or just had a lapse in time, because the next thing I remember, him coming back from the hospital saying my mom didn't make it. And I just remember in that moment feeling disconnected from the world. I feel like I'm in that, I could just remember it like an astronaut with no gravity, just floating. It was a disconnect. And I just lost it. I just started crying. And every time someone would ask me about my mom, I would just start boo-hooing because it was unthinkable. In spite of my mom's illness, I just never imagined her to leave. You know, your parents are immortal. They're not human. They don't ever die. That's what you think as a child. So to lose my mom, it was one of the most devastating things and occurrences in my life. And so my other 3 siblings were out of the house. So myself and my 2 younger siblings went to move to Compton to live with my mother's father. And it was a struggle because I'm 14. That's a rough age. It's an age where you think you're an adult, but you're not. And then I had lost my mom. I'm starting high school in a new city with new people. It was not good, you know. I struggled, but prior to my mother passing, she had met a minister who was a bus driver, and I was introduced to Christianity. And at 11 years old, I accepted Christ. At 13, I was baptized. So I was going to church during this time before my mom passed, although my mom was a Muslim and my stepdad was a Muslim. But my mom had introduced me to it, and I know that it was my faith in that church that got me through my mother's passing, that got me through going to Compton and going to high school and navigating those new waters. They
But I'm
call
going
me
to
the Bible
stop. But
girl.
you are,
Yes.
a lot of people, unfortunately, go through similar have circumstances that you did, and they are able to find solace and in religion, but they are not able to do what you did or have done or are doing. I mean, you not just got through it, but you became, and I can't even read all the accolades, but in terms of your successes in theater and writing and all of those kinds of things, what what is, I don't know, I say what is your secret, but what's your, there's something about you that was just more than the resilience and even the religion, the the talent, the innate talent, the perseverance. What is it?
My mother always told me I was strong. She said, "You're so strong." And I believe that I have purpose. And I believe that's why I was held up, why I just can't give up. There's just something in me that I can't explain. I believe it's God given. And I believe that it was put there so that I could have a platform so that I could speak to others. Right now, Kathryn, there's someone who is being molested. There's someone being beaten that might be within earshot of this conversation. And I believe that that energy, that drive is there so that I would have this moment in time to be able to share. You're not alone. You can make it. You're not by yourself. We're here with you. We understand. Just don't give up. Keep going, keep fighting. That doesn't have to be the end of your story or the end of your life. There's a future for you. And I believe that's why this indefatigable energy is in me where I keep going because I have a message for others. And I believe that's what it's all about. It's not just about being on TV or writing books, but it's about being there for my fellow mankind and people that are coming up that have suffered or suffer more than I have, that you can make it. Don't give up.
Well, you certainly didn't give up. uh, you definitely did not give up. We know that. Okay. And I mean, you went on, you graduated from USC, one of the best universities in the country, got a degree in journalism. You just kept on going. And I guess that's how you're able to have this conversation and write this novel. So, and you've talked about the connection between your mother dying when you were 14 and the how that specifically influenced the writing of your book, this particular novel.
Yes, I wanted to write about the love of a mother. A mother-daughter bond is a special bond. And in the two characters, Leslie Graham, who's a news reporter who's trying to become the first African American editor at her paper, she has two daughters, Julie and Rhonda. And at the opening of the novel, something happens to them, someone attacks them. So she's trying to ascertain what is going on, who's after my daughters. Now it's revealed that she has a dark secret from the past, and she's afraid that that person, that individual, those people have come back to haunt her. But you see, as the novel unfolds, her unrelentless struggle and that mama bear coming out to get to the bottom and to protect her daughters to the point where she's smothering them. And the same thing with Barbara Graham. She has a daughter that's missing, although we find out she's not as innocent as she appears to be. So I vicariously got to experience this mother love that I lost, at the age of 14. It was kind of, it's a catharsis, to write it and see and witness and go through. Because when I write my characters, like an actress, I put my characters on and I'm writing through them. I write first person. So I got to experience that, and that love was there, and that was kind of cool.
So the core of all your work, it sounds like, and everything that you've done and are doing is that mother love. Your mom who died when you were 14 years old, that she's still there with you or for you. Yeah,
Always.
yeah, always.
Yeah.
Now, another thing, and hopefully the same thing happens with your novel, but you apparently you created 3 viral videos that
Yes.
combined you got 8 million views. How did you do that? Everyone who has a podcast is listening. How'd you do that?
Well, they were on TikTok. They were on TikTok.
Yeah,
And, I have this creative mind.
you do.
So one of them I thought about, McDonald's Happy Meal. So one of them has to involve where I buy this Happy Meal and then I come in and I tell them, I say, I want my money back because this meal didn't make me happy. I'm not happy in my relationship. I'm not happy in my
I
life.
like that.
It's all made up. And I had these young men film it, and the manager, he was looking at me like, he was perplexed. He was like, what? So, but I put on a whole show
Yeah.
and people were looking. And so it just captured the imagination of viewers, and people couldn't believe it. It was so hilarious. I look at it today and I laugh, it's just comedic.
Well,
But
everybody
yeah,
can
I took
identify
off.
with that, I have to say.
Yeah,
It
because of
resonates with
Happy Meal.
everyone, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so that was one of it. And another one was really interesting. I was coming back. I was going to visit my brother who lives in Sacramento, and I was at the airport. And there's this big rabbit, at the airport in Sacramento. And I had the idea because they had this what I love about TikTok, they have all these other apps. So they had this app where all the photographers are like a paparazzi taking pictures of you. So I edited it where it looked like I was being taken pictures by paparazzi. And people actually thought I was Kamala Harris.
Oh,
They thought it.
I,
they thought, they thought I
that's
was Kamala Harris coming from the airport. And it just blew up.
Oh, that's funny. I have to look at your
Yeah.
photo again. Yeah. Oh God, that's a riot. Okay, now
Yeah,
I
it was
get how you
funny.
got all those viewers, right? Now, okay, so now you have to be as clever to get all those readers for the book, right? For the
Yes,
novel.
yes,
Yeah.
I do. Yeah, yeah. And the book was voted in the top 100 indie thriller books of 2024. So it's by Kirkus. It's a really good read. The people are reading it. I'm reading the reviews, and people are sitting there on the edge of their seat. They missed their train stops reading it. They had to call in sick because they were all up all night trying to find out. Because that connection between Leslie and Barbara, that's the thing where people are trying to figure out how are these women connected and who's doing these things. And then Barbara is putting on this whole ruse because she's made it appear as though her daughter's missing, but she knows where Nancy is. And that is a journey, following her and her putting on this act in front of the media and her husband. And it's a wild ride, but it's
Yes.
worth taking.
Okay, and it's like a binge book, I'm thinking, right? It's the same as
Yeah.
yeah, it's a binge book. It sounds great. I read in the beginning you're working with Tyler Perry. Everyone wants to know what is it like to work for Tyler Perry?
I just have to say, I feel such a connection to him because I don't know if you've heard, he's talked about his childhood, and like myself, he had an abusive childhood. And I remember my second year on the show, we were still in quarantine because it was during COVID. And I saw him pass by and he got out of the car he was driving in, and we connected. And, I just started crying because I was like, I thought about, wow, that this man was a child who was abused and he didn't give up either. And if he had given up, I wouldn't be acting. I wouldn't have my dream on this show. But he's a very gracious man. He hugged me. When I came in season 2, he had already assigned new writers and directors, so I didn't get to work with him directly. But I've seen him many times on set. I remember when we filmed our last season, he came and hugged everybody for the holidays, and just a very phenomenal, humble man to say he's a billionaire. But he it starts at the top in
Yeah.
terms, I believe, the energy and the culture for any establishment. And Tyler Perry Studios, there is such a beautiful, wonderful place to work. The show, there's a lot of camaraderie. They treat us like queens and kings. It's just a great, amazing place to work, Tyler Perry Studios. And I believe that's because of the spirit of Tyler that it is.
Yeah, nurturing. It sounds like very
Yes.
nurturing. Yeah. And so I assume like I'm going to say this because I have that information from your PR people, but you're over 50.
Yes, I
And
am.
yes, women over 50. This is kind of a whole new area that's kind of trending, I think. A lot of women over 50 are talking about hey, changing careers, going forward, having a lot of opportunities that women, let's say in your mother's generation, as you described it, did not have. So, what is it like being over 50 and doing everything that you do and being successful at it and having all of these opportunities? And it's not time to throw in the towel. You're an example. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, we live in a youth culture, even the prime demographic, 18 to 49. It's wonderful. I was in corporate America when I decided to step out on and take a leap of faith and head back into entertainment, into acting and writing full time. And I remember I took a workshop once, and of course, I was the oldest person in the workshop. And I remember saying, I want a series. And all the young people kind of looked at me sideline like,
Are
what is
you
this old
crazy?
bag?
Yeah.
Is this old bag? What she think?
Yeah.
And then lo and behold, so I think it's exciting and I think it's great because at this age, you're confident. At this age, you've been around the block. You know who you are. You're not trying to find yourself. You're bold. You have something to offer. You have experience. So I'm so much better now in the industry than I was when I started out in my 30s because I'm fearless. And that's why I can go into McDonald's and do what I do. I'm fearless. And I think that's an upside of stepping out at this age. And there are more opportunities, and people are taking care of themselves better. I work out every day. I try to take care of my skin. I drink water. Mentally, I'm together. I'm just a better package than I was in my 30s. I just have so much more to offer. And I believe the casting people see that, the producers see that, and it just opens up more doors. So if you are thinking about changing careers, don't be afraid, do it. The best is yet to come. That's how I look at it.
And don't you think also when you're over 50, there's less concern about what people think about you? You don't really care because, as you say, you've had the experience, you know what you want to do, and you're really not as sensitive maybe as when you were younger, concerned about what others think or uh, even critique you, criticize you. That kind of just it's noise. It kind of like it doesn't bother you anymore.
So true, Kathryn, because also when you reach this age, you realize that beauty's fleeting, that it's not about the outside, it's about the inside. You know,
Fortunately,
thank God,
I
right?
hope so.
How do you feel about yourself inside? You'll find me on any given day with torn off jeans and a cap on my head, and I'll step out. I'm good because I know that the outside, because I struggled with that as when I was younger, when I was acting out all the trauma that had happened to me. I hated myself. Was bulimic, I was anorexic. But when I got healed and I got better and I got counseling and did got better, I learned to love me for me inside me. So you don't care about, it doesn't matter to you because you know that that's not the real you. The real me is in me, that I have intuitive value. Every human being does, just being here. It's not contingent upon how you look, how smart you are, how much education you have. You are worthy and valuable because you are.
What do you say? Because you are an actress, obviously, and you do have to have certain hair and makeup and costumes when you're doing a show. But what would you say to women? A lot of women, with Botox and facelifts and all of that, and are struggling to do those kinds of things so that they can look 25, but you never do look 25 no matter what. Anyway, if you look at a 25-year-old. So what would you say to those women?
I have to speak for myself too,
Yeah.
because I'm going to be honest, I struggle too. I look at the wrinkles, I use the cream, but I believe that, we're going to have to get away from that because, like you said, you're never going to look 25 again. And we have to try to have a paradigm shift and change our thinking and realize that let it go, age gracefully, that we are still worthy, we are still valuable. That's where that inner comes from. And how do you get that inner self-esteem? Do esteemable things. And I think reaching out to what has helped me is being of service, whether it be volunteering, giving back, helping the homeless, get involved in other people, and then you won't be so focused on yourself. And then you'll be building that inner part of you that's going to overshadow the outer part of you. And more power to people that do the Botox and do the plastic surgery. If that's what you need to do, I'm not putting that down. But don't let that be the all of end alls. Work on the inner person too.
Yep. Great advice. We have a couple minutes left, so we want people to go out, buy the book, The Daughter Between Them. I've been talking to Aretha, like, I always want to say Aretha Franklin, but Al-
Great
Alretha
woman.
Thomas. I know she was one of my favorites, by the
Yes,
way. So
yes.
that keeps coming up. But anyway, yeah, The Daughter Between Them. So give us website platforms to go to for more information about the book and about your work.
Yes, if you go to my website, as soon as it pops up, you can click on it, get the book. All my social media icons are on there. Just click Alretha, Alretha Thomas.com. And you could Google me and everything will come up as well. But if you go to my website, you'll be able to get everything there.
Great. Thanks so much for being on the show today. I mean, great talking to you and a really good conversation, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kathryn. It was awesome.
Joining me today is Dr. Julius Birnbaum, MD. His book is Living Well with Autoimmune Diseases, a rheumatologist's guide to taking charge of your health. 20 million adults in the United States live with an autoimmune disease. That's 20 million. And as we head into Autoimmune Awareness Month this March, Dr. Julius Birnbaum offers essential advice for navigating the complex world of various autoimmune diseases. He helps patients, caregivers, and healthcare professionals understand the diagnosis, management, and treatment of conditions like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and more. He also shares valuable insights into why depression is a frequently overlooked cause of pain in autoimmune diseases and why autoimmune diseases can be so hard to diagnose. This essential overview of autoimmune diseases, supplemented with helpful tools for readers and their loved ones, offers hope and empowerment for managing these complex conditions. Dr. Birnbaum is an associate professor of rheumatology at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. Welcome to the show, Dr. Birnbaum.
So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Well, I think maybe I just alluded to it in the intro, but 20 million adults in the United States live with this disease. But yet you're saying that even given that, it's still a difficult disease to diagnose. And why is that?
So that's a great question. So I think that there can be inherent difficulties in thinking about autoimmune diseases. So, for example, if you have high blood pressure, you do a cuff and your physician can tell you right away that you have high blood pressure. If you have a strep throat, you can go to an urgent care, and within seconds, the healthcare provider can tell you that you have the strep throat. So autoimmune diseases are a little bit more tricky. They could take different guises, even in one autoimmune disease. So if we're thinking about lupus patients, one lupus patient can have arthritis as their main manifestation. Another lupus patient can have a rash as their main manifestations. And so lupus can present very ubiquitously across all organ systems. So every patient with lupus is different, and therefore there needs to be much different diagnostic approaches. It could be more complex, as I mentioned, compared to a strep throat or compared to high blood pressure.
There's also, I think, and maybe not now, but over the years, people would say they have an autoimmune disease. And there was kind of this, well, is that really true? I mean, what is it? Is it just kind of a made up thing? Is it this amorphous kind of group of symptoms? I think, just in the general public, that's kind of been an attitude. Is that true?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people can be overwhelmed when they hear the term autoimmune disease. So what I tell my patients is that they just have to happen that we have an immune system, and the immune system normally functions from fighting off infections. And then in autoimmune diseases, the immune system can become confused and it could start affecting different areas of our body. So for example, if an autoimmune disease affects the joints, that could give rise to rheumatoid arthritis. If an autoimmune disease affects the muscles, that could give myositis. But each of these diseases has its own different footprints, and there's different permutations. The trick is to recognize the footprints of each of these autoimmune diseases. And I think that if you can, like I mentioned in my book, Living Well with Autoimmune Diseases, you can then be put in the driver's seat. So my book, if I'm going to have one important theme, and I'll say this over and over again, it's empowerment, empowerment, and empowerment. And you can empower by virtue of understanding how your diseases are diagnosed, as we've been discussing. Empowerment, understanding how autoimmune diseases are treated. So if you imagine yourself being put in the driver's seat, like I try to do so in my book, I think that the autoimmune diseases become much more real and vivid and graphic and can be more easily diagnosed.
Yeah, and when you talk about empowerment, then there's less fear, or at least less fear on the patient's part anyway. If there's, if you have the information, like your book, for instance, your patient becomes less fearful. And also, as obviously that you noted, I mean, the medications now are so much better. Talk to us about some of those medications, because they're getting, they're much improved over the past, 5, 10 years?
Sure, that's a great question. So I think of it as follows. So older medications, which still can work in patients, they work by carpet bombing the immune system. So all of the immune system can be targeted, but not necessarily in a very precise way. So right now, we have new DMARDs, or disease-modifying agents, that are biological agents. They're called biological agents because they're prepared from microorganisms in a lab. But what they amazingly can do is they can pinpoint paths of destruction by the autoimmune diseases in very, very precise ways. So, for example, there's a protein that circulates in the blood in rheumatoid arthritis. It's called tumor necrosis factor inhibitor. And what we have right now is we have these medications that are truly amazing, and they could target specifically tumor necrosis factor inhibitors with pinpoint precision. So again, I think with these more pinpointed treatments that act more specifically, we really are in the golden era of treating autoimmune diseases, and we can understand them again in more pinpoint and precise ways.
So technology is at the forefront of all of this in terms of, we're not talking about curing, but managing the disease. How does AI fit into this? Because they talk about AI and, its ability to have all kinds of positive impact on medicine. What about in this case, in terms of medication or in terms of diagnosis?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question. So literally like 1 hour ago, I was discussing AI with a colleague. So I think AI fits into rheumatologies in specific ways. When we ask patients about their questions, and we ask about like a wide variety of symptoms, like do you have hair loss, do you have joint pain, do you have dry eyes, dry mouth, do your fingertips change colors in colder weather? And you can imagine that you're at a rheumatologist visit and you have to describe all these different symptoms, and a rheumatologist has to keep pace with your symptoms that you're describing. And so what happens a lot of times is physicians try to catch up to your description of symptoms, and they're looking at a keyboard, for example, and they're not making any eye contact. So what they have now is you could just sit there and talk with the patient and don't have to worry about the keyboard. And AI will generate these gorgeous notes. We call this a history of present illness. And this is important because during the visit, you can establish a face-to-face visit. You can establish rapport. You could be felt legitimized. You can feel like your physician is more empathic. So I think that is the important role of AI, is that AI actually humanizes the physician-patient interaction. Now, where AI needs some work in rheumatology is when we talk about the assessment and plan, because these diseases are very, very complex. So AI is not going to generate different diagnoses that might be applied. It's still incumbent upon the rheumatologist to think through. It's a very cognitive field. So I think AI, it generates a sense of humanity when you first have the physician-patient interaction. But when it comes to developing a complex treatment plan, I think that's where AI lags behind.
So what was the allure for you to become a rheumatologist?
So here's my story, and it's somewhat of a circuitous route. So I'm actually the only physician in this country who's trained as a neurologist as well as a rheumatologist. When I did my neurology training, the physicians and the patients that I found most fascinating were patients with rheumatic diseases. So as a neurologist, I could evaluate neck injury that could occur in patients with rheumatoid arthritis. I could evaluate the different types of brain disease that can occur in lupus patients. But I really needed a more rock-strong field towards understanding rheumatology in more detail. So I went back and I completed my training in internal medicine, and then I completed fellowship training at Johns Hopkins. So all told, this was 9 years of additional training beyond medical school. But what happened when I started my career at Hopkins, I pioneered a clinic which is called the Neurorheumatology Clinic. And it blossomed into the only clinic in the country that specifically treated diseases at the interface between neurology and rheumatology. So I could be referred, for example, a patient that lived 10 blocks away, or I could be referred by, for example, sheiks who come from Saudi Arabia. So it really was a complex clinic. And I think that I remained privileged and awestruck and had the opportunity to really partner with patients with neurological complications of rheumatic diseases.
And all right, so rheumatic disease is one of the things. There is a syndrome, a disease in which more than 90% of the patients are women. What is that?
So
Describe what this, yeah.
I'm glad you asked the question. So that disease is called Sjogren's disease. So Sjogren's disease is an autoimmune disease. It causes dry eyes and dry mouth. It could also affect different areas of the body, such as nerves, which cause severe nerve pain. It could affect the kidneys. It can affect the lungs. But what's interesting about Sjogren's is that previously the time interval between symptoms and diagnosis used to be as long as 7 years. And you can imagine that, like 7 years of misery.
Suffering, yeah.
Suffering, yeah. Now because it's more on the radar screen, the time between symptoms and diagnosis has curtailed. But yep, Sjogren's is the autoimmune disease that affects 90% females.
And why 90% females as opposed to males? Just estrogen?
Yeah, exactly right. So it's estrogen, it's change in hormones. The most common age of onset is women in their 40s and 50s. So I think you're exactly right. These hormonal changes make you have more of a predisposition towards developing Sjogren's disease.
So what happens, doctor, when you're diagnosed with this disease? You know, you go into the doctor's office, you're really not expecting it, or you don't know what to expect, and all of a sudden, whoa, you have an autoimmune disease. What is it? All of the things that you've been talking about and describing. And you walk out of the physician's office and it's like, it's depressing. People get, it's anxiety provoking. It's all of these, very negative emotional feelings. And you do talk about why depression actually can cause pain, is part of the reason that people who have autoimmune diseases also have a lot of pain, and it's related to their depression. Because I think sometimes physicians, obviously not all, they kind of overlook that, overlook the emotional impact of the diagnosis.
Yeah, no, so I think it really is important to recognize depression, because depression can present in so many ways, and it might not just be a patient saying I'm feeling sad. It could be a patient saying I'm hurting, and I'm feeling overwhelmed. So, when people think of depression, they think of sadness as the primary feature. But if you read my book and Living with Autoimmune Diseases, I also talk about how depression can first present as pain, and then it's the physician's job to try to sort through whether the pain is due to an autoimmune diseases or depression. But I agree, depression is often underdiagnosed, and then it's incumbent upon the physician-patient interaction to try to diagnose depression. The treatment of depression can sometimes lead to better insight. It can establish a sense of hope and optimism, and better treatment of depression will help autoimmune diseases.
Yeah, and I've noticed sometimes going to and also personal experience, but just in general, people go to the physician, whether it's an autoimmune disease or whatever, and you get bombarded with the diagnosis and what you should do and the medication, and you're supposed to walk out of the office and sort of connect with all of that, and you can't. You need time to go home to think about it, and then come back, and then you're ready to go kind of to the second stage of what medications I need, how I should change my lifestyle, what needs to be done. That takes more time, and I know physicians now, and this is part of this question, if you have 15 minutes to talk to somebody, that doesn't quite do it, does it?
No, you're right. I think it's important because a lot of times when being diagnosed with rheumatic disease, the first visit was a more holistic plan, where we're going. But I'd like to say, you hear the phrase, there's light at the end of the tunnel. And what I try to think about is actually when you diagnose patients with rheumatic diseases, there's light at the beginning of the tunnel. And I try to emphasize that, there's an incredible variety of medications that we can use. And the one thing I want to emphasize, it's not uncommon at the time of my visit for patients to ask me, well, can autoimmune diseases be cured? And I said, well, they can't be cured. But if you think about other diseases, we can't cure high blood pressure. You need to take high blood pressure medications, and this can be managed. High cholesterol can't be cured, but you could take medications, and this can help treat your high cholesterol. So in the same way, even though autoimmune diseases can't be cured, they're chronic diseases, and they could be successfully managed in incredible ways. And that's why I try to tell patients there's light at the beginning of the tunnel.
Okay, light at the beginning of the tunnel obviously could be your book, helping patients to manage all of this, in terms of what we've been talking about. So maybe just take us step by step in the beginning of the middle and end of your book in terms of how that will help us to be able to manage a chronic disease.
Yeah, so when I think about my book, I think there are 4 features. So the first feature is autoimmune empowerment, and I say this over and over again: empowerment, the diagnosis, empowerment in terms of treatment, and putting you in the driver's seat. The second facet of the book is, right now, it's the only book being published on the marketplace that deals with a wide variety of autoimmune diseases. So there's chapters devoted to lupus, chapters devoted to rheumatoid arthritis, chapters devoted to Sjogren's disease, chapters devoted to vasculitis. There are chapters devoted to rheumatoid arthritis and psoriatic arthritis, chapters devoted to myositis and scleroderma. So I think the other thing in terms of learning about the autoimmune disease is that this juxtaposition lets you understand how each of these diseases are interrelated. For example, if you have one autoimmune disease, you have a higher disposition to develop a second autoimmune diseases. So I think this book having all these chapters is important. The third thing about this book is also there's not chapters explicitly devoted to autoimmune diseases, but it talks about facets that are important to patients with autoimmune diseases. So as you mentioned, there's a chapter on depression, there's a chapter on diet, there's a chapter on fibromyalgia. So I think these apply to any autoimmune disease. And finally, the last facet of this book that I think is important is that I include narratives, physician-patient narratives that I'm privileged to see on a daily basis. And these can be very captivating and vivid stories. So in a sense, I open up my clinic. So patients who read about these vignettes, I think it'll make them feel less lonely and isolated. So, this is what my book is about. I think first about disempowerment and empowering patients. The second is a book devoted to many autoimmune diseases. The third is thinking about facets not necessarily autoimmune in nature, such as depression. And the last is opening up my clinic so patients can witness the incredible drama and vignettes that I see on a daily basis.
Yeah, you're connecting everybody in the community, which is, as you say, very important. 2 questions. Genetic. Is there a genetic component to these autoimmune diseases?
Yeah, so that's another great question. I think when I talk about genetics with patients, I tend to say that there's a genetic predisposition. And what that means is that if you have lupus, your family member is not necessarily at a higher genetic risk to have lupus. Perhaps if you're a patient with lupus, you might have a family relative with a different autoimmune diseases. For example, you might have lupus and a sister with rheumatoid arthritis or an uncle with psoriatic arthritis. So I think there's definitely a genetic component. And again, this is why I think the book it can be incredibly powerful because, if you're reading this book and you have lupus and you have a family relative with Sjogren's, I think this book will also help them. But the story is I do think that there's a genetic predisposition.
So if there's a genetic predisposition, I assume there's some mutations on the chromosome or gene or whatever. Should you get genetic testing?
No, because I don't think that genetic testing, we're not at that point yet. I think genetic testing makes you more prone. So if you think about lupus or any rheumatic disease, you can think about a full house of misfortune. So that's a genetic predisposition, but perhaps like you suffered some environmental insult. And at the same time, maybe you had a virus at some point in your life. So I think it's genetics and its interrelationship with other causes of autoimmune diseases that makes you more prone to develop it.
What about stress? Is that part of the environmental situation that could cause or, you know, um,
Yeah.
cause the disease? Yeah, to
So when we think about stress, I don't necessarily think it causes the disease, but when you have an autoimmune disease, it can definitely um, make it worse. And so I think managing your stress levels is an important component in terms of lessening the severity of your autoimmune disease.
And what about age? Is there an age at which most people are diagnosed, or is it just across the board?
Yeah, so it depends upon which autoimmune disease you're describing. So, for example, as we talked about Sjogren's disease, it tends to present in women in their 40s and 50s. Lupus patients can have a disease which presents early in adulthood, and you can have a disease that also presents when you're 60 or 70. So all these ages at onset of diseases, they definitely occur at a certain age, depending upon which autoimmune disease you're describing.
Now, what about family or partners, children, spouses? I mean, when you've been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, obviously it is, I would say, a shock perhaps. How does the family need to get involved? Are they part of the, not the cure, but part of helping the patient to manage all of what we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think that family definitely plays a role. You know, when you first diagnosed with an autoimmune diseases, as you mentioned, this can be quite a shock, and it stirs a lot of emotions. So it doesn't matter whether you're stoic or gregarious. You have to describe these emotions to what you're going through. You know, it doesn't have to be a whole, story or narratives, or maybe you do want to supply a whole story of narratives. It depends upon you about whether you want to give shorter longer sentences or longest or shorter, longer sentences. But if you don't express these emotions, they become bottled up, and they can definitely contribute to a sense of feeling alienated and disempowered. So having your family engage with you is a crucial step, so you can start feeling empowered and ultimately have a more effective relationship with your physician.
So, as a physician, healthcare provider, do you engage the whoever it is in the family or the person's realm, their family, friends, whatever it is, who are going to be supportive? Do they come to see you as well? Are they part of the process in your office?
Yeah, so it's interesting. It differs from patient to patient, and you have to be mindful of that. So, if it's a younger woman who's coming in with parents, there's probably a different relationship than if there's a spouse coming in with the patient. But you kind of get a sense of how the patients relate to each other. And if the younger patient, for example, is deferring to the parents, then you're going to be addressing the parents as much as the patient. And perhaps, if a spouse is involved, you'll want to present details to the patient, and the spouse might chime in at a later date. So engaging family relatives is really, really important. It just differs upon families and how they want to relate to each other and how they relate to the physician.
Right. We only have a couple minutes left, so give us an platforms, websites we can go to for more information about your book, about your work, and yes, and what you're doing.
Yeah, so if you want to find more about the book and the purposes and its outreach, you could come to juliusbirnbaum.com. If you Google Julius Birnbaum and Sjogren's disease, for example, you'll see articles and research studies that I previously had published on neurological complications of Sjogren's disease. If you type Julius Birnbaum at University of Pennsylvania Medical Center, that'll come up. And there'll probably be some research studies if you type in Julius Birnbaum at Johns Hopkins, which is where I previously were before moving to Pittsburgh.
Well, doctor, thanks so much for being on this show. Julius Birnbaum, MD, Living Well with Autoimmune Diseases, a rheumatologist guide to taking charge of your health. Lots of great information. Good. We want more. So we will get the book. And thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure talking with you.